I'm here with Nancy Gunzenhauser Popper, a partner in the Employment, Labor, and Workforce Management practice at EBG, who is going to explain U.S. pay transparency laws. Nancy, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. Good to speak with you.
So, Inc. named 2022 the year of pay transparency. How has pay transparency laws evolved since last year, and what should we expect for 2023?
So 2022 was the year that we saw more and more jurisdictions start to undertake pay transparency laws, and in particular, pay transparency laws that require employers to disclose salary ranges on job postings. So there've been federal laws, state laws over the past several years that have been promoting equal pay in the workplace. And they've achieved that through a variety of different ways, either enhancing equal pay protections by changing the standards of you can't pay women less than men and you have a different standard to meet. Some have done so by saying you can't pay people differently based on other protected categories, so not just based on sex or gender. And we've seen it transition over the years. So a couple of years ago, the big trend was salary history laws. So employers couldn't ask employees, what do you make at your current job? Because that was a common practice. What do you currently make? And that's how I'll decide how much I want to pay you now. As this moves forward, states and cities have thought about, if we're already not asking what people make, an employer generally has an idea of what they're going to pay for a position that they're posting for. And in further effort to help with recruiting, to not have people surprised at the end, and then more broadly, to make sure that people are aware of what they should be making and how that compares to their peers. Many jurisdictions, New York, California, Colorado, are now, state of Washington, requiring that in all job postings, employers need to include a salary range. And this is just the next effort in attempts at transparency in the workplace when thinking about pay. 2022 saw a lot of legislation being proposed. It passed in some of these big jurisdictions, but there's more and more being proposed. And even in states that we don't typically think about as being the most progressive states to pass employment laws. So I think in 2023, we're going to see more and more jurisdictions go in that same direction.
Do you think this will happen more federally, so every state?
I don't know that we're going to see it at the federal level quite yet. At the federal level, we still have just equal pay protections on the basis of sex. There was a big change back in 2009 with the Lilly Ledbetter Equal Pay Act amendment that changed the standard by which someone could bring a lawsuit alleging unfair pay, that it didn't have to be unfair pay decision that happened most recently, but the fact that you're continuing to be underpaid is a reason and extends the statute of limitations. We've seen a lot of efforts at the federal level with respect to employment laws that we have not seen over the past 5, 10, 15 years. I don't know that this one's going to make it as far, particularly as it's still in the stage where more and more states and cities are adopting it. But you never know. I wasn't sure that we would actually see a broad ban on non-competes, but hey, that's where we're at right now. So maybe.
How do managers and employers handle employees who confront them when discovering their pay is far below the advertised one?
Yeah, so we do hope that that is never the situation, because companies really shouldn't be posting for roles with a stated range when they know people are well below that range or well above that range, because then it's not really an accurate representation of the range associated with the role. But managers and employers should be prepared for this if they operate in a jurisdiction that requires these pay transparency rules, and should be thinking about how they want to address, whether they're reevaluating those ranges, whether they're undertaking a pay equity analysis, and maybe they just haven't gotten caught up to actually updating those, the salary ranges and associated pay for current employees. But they should take it seriously because these are, real claims that employees are bringing forward, and be prepared with how to answer it and have a point person designated internally who will be able to look into the concerns, whether that's on the human resources or people side, or whether that's someone on the legal side, having someone who's prepared to answer these questions.
Can employees hold employers accountable for any pay discrepancies?
Yes. So as we've seen, some of these newer laws are particular to what needs to go on a job posting, but most states have equal pay laws on the books, and these laws say that employers cannot pay people differently on the basis of certain protected categories. Most of them, it's you can't pay women less than men, or you can't pay men less than women if that's the case, because it's based on sex or gender. A couple of more states have enhanced this to any protected category. So if an employee believes that they're not being paid fairly and it's based on one of these protected characteristics, they're able to raise concerns and bring a claim under these equal pay laws. And that's one way that employers or employees could hold their employers accountable. There's also the opportunity to raise concerns with the EEOC, with state agencies, city agencies that govern employment laws and unfair treatment.
Some companies have opted for what seems to be a loophole that allows them to post very broad salary ranges, like a job that has a range of 40,000 to 2 million. What's your take on this?
Getting a little too cute. These laws require that you have a good faith estimate of what the range is. My guess is that no company is realistically going to be paying someone between 40 grand and 2 million. Most employers do have a much better sense of what the compensation will be. And, all of these laws speak to what the base salary is. So most companies that have that kind of variable compensation ranges are dealing with, bonuses, deferred compensation, commissions, other types of compensation that exists. And these laws generally speak to putting the base salary range. So I don't think that that's going to be looked too kindly upon by the state and local agencies that are enforcing these laws, and really doesn't speak to the spirit of the laws, which is to give a good faith estimate. There's value in it for employers as well in providing an accurate and realistic range, because you're going to get candidates who are truly interested in the role and think that they are, meeting at the right point when it comes to compensation. Recruiting processes are long. They take a lot of effort from both the candidates and from the recruiting side. And there's no value in getting to the very end stages of discussions and realizing that you're not aligned on compensation at all. So I think that there is some real value in, being able to put together a very realistic range, because you're going to draw more serious candidates for the role.
Yeah, and it can waste a lot of people's time, and a lot of companies and recruiters, complain that the process of hiring someone takes forever. Well, if you're more upfront with, what the individual gets out of that position from a compensation standpoint, that probably will help weed and filter out candidates for you.
Absolutely. And listen, everyone's going to view themselves differently within a stated range. A reasonable range could differ. For some ranges it might be $5,000 to $10,000. For others, it might realistically, because it's starting a lot higher, be closer to a $50,000 to $75,000 range. And people are going to, have negotiations over their compensation, but at least they're in the same ballpark to start out.
Exactly. How can companies prepare or manage this pay transparency legal disclosures so they protect themselves?
So companies should be aware of where they're operating. And I know that sounds kind of silly to say. Most companies say, I know where we work. But as we're in this era of greater remote work and distributed workforces, um, companies really need to keep a handle of where they have remote employees, because that can open themselves up to being subject to some of these laws that they would not otherwise be subject to. For example, in under the New York City pay transparency law, if you meet the number of employee threshold, so 4 employees, and at least one of those employees is based in New York City, then the New York City law will apply for all positions that are required to work in New York City, as well as any remote position where the candidate, in theory, could end up living and working in New York City. So even if your organization is based in a state or city that doesn't yet have one of these laws, you'll want to know where your workforce is, because your remote employees may open you up to having to comply with this for other remote postings. And another way that employers can prepare is to start thinking about how you actually pay people. To the extent that you have a variety of roles that are in the same job title or same position, take a look at what people are making. You may actually have a range that makes sense, and even if it's not formalized, people are within certain amounts, and there's discrepancies maybe based on experience, performance, which are valid reasons to have pay discrepancies, but they need to have some support. And then before posting for a new role, where you're going to be including this pay disclosure, make sure that people are not outside the range who are currently sitting in that type of role or one that's similar. That is going to be a surefire way for a current employee to raise a concern. And employers should be doing some due diligence around this before posting for new roles.
And from the employee perspective, what if they discover a pay discrepancy? What do you recommend they do?
So employees are allowed to talk about wages with one another, to the extent that the employee is not, the HR person who's looking at other people's data, pay data. They're allowed to talk about their own wages with other employees. And if employees are concerned about it, then, a first step is to speak with the manager, human resources, people team, whoever's the appropriate contact internally, to question it, to the extent that there's a valid reason for folks being paid differently. Yes, these two people have the same title, but this other person has taken on some significant responsibilities, or they came in with an extra 5 years of experience on this specific type of project, and so that's why they're earning more. There may be some sort of explanation that can provide context, or maybe it is that the person, there's not a great reason. The company just hasn't kept up with it, or maybe hasn't done a pay equity analysis, and then they have the opportunity to address it. But I think that speaking with manager HR is a good first step.
Do you think these new laws that require disclosures will help achieve equal pay for equal work across genders, races, and nationalities?
I mean, I think it's a good first step. As we're thinking about, in conjunction with all of these other laws around equal pay that have gone into effect, with respect to race and nationality, that's still not protected at a federal level. There's nothing that under the equal pay laws that say that it's unlawful to pay people differently on those bases. Now, there's the discrimination laws that generally say you shouldn't make those decisions based on race, nationality. But we're seeing more and more states expand the access of the equal pay laws to try and push that forward. I do think that these new laws are the biggest impact is that it's going to force companies to really think about how they pay people and give it thought in advance to what would an appropriate range be and how does that compare to others? When in the past, pay decisions may have been simply budgetary at a moment in time without thought to how it would impact others who are currently in seat. And so I think that there's a real opportunity here for that.
What do most workers or employers get wrong or fail to understand about this law?
I think one big thing is that this law does not allow employees to reach out to their employer and ask what other people are currently making. Um, there's a unique provision in the new California law that an employee can ask about the salary range for their current position in the seat that they're in. And these laws generally are geared towards applicants, people who are applying for a job that's posted. But these equal pay laws and pay transparency laws do not allow employees to ask what other people are making. That is still information that is confidential to those individual employees, and that's not something that companies are required to or really would want to disclose to other employees because that's people's private information.
But as you said, they can talk amongst each other.
Yep, they're allowed to, but employees can't force others to talk about what their compensation is, right? Some people are more open to it than others. And if someone says, I don't want to talk about this, they can't be pressured or, made to feel uncomfortable because they don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, there's been a lot of research that shows that younger people, especially Gen Z and maybe younger millennials, are more open to talking about their salaries with each other.
Yeah, I think that's what we're seeing as we see, are working with companies and they're getting people talking about pay. I think that there's certainly a generational aspect to it.
The civil penalties range from hundreds of dollars to, $250,000 in New York City. So hundreds of dollars in Maryland, a lot more money in New York. Why is there such a discrepancy between these cities and states? And are the penalties great enough to even matter?
So one of the reasons that the penalty damage structure looks so different is how these laws are being enacted. In New York City, the law is simply an amendment to the existing New York City human rights law. And that law is just a general protection against discrimination, harassment, retaliation. And so it adds to the law that it's an unfair employment practice to not include the salary range on the job posting. And it treats it as a general discrimination complaint. And so the way that the New York City complaint procedure works is, employees can raise concerns directly to the Commission on Human Rights, or they can, bring a lawsuit, but it's not a strict fine or penalty structure. It is, how was the person damaged? Are they eligible for compensatory damages, punitive damages, those sorts of things? In other states, these have been enacted as freestanding laws that are not amendments to existing discrimination laws, and they're being treated more like a penalty or fine structure that if you have one job posting and it fails to include the range, it's X amount of dollars per day or per posting or per locations that you've posted it. So those sorts of approaches.
You were mentioning earlier about remote and hybrid jobs. Will these transparency laws impact people who are working remotely?
Yeah, so many of these laws, are intended to capture remote roles. So we've had a huge shift in the way that people work over the past 3 years. And because of that, as laws are starting to be enacted now, they're recognizing that people are working remotely and they don't only work in one location or they're not working in a physical office. Because of that, and because this law is geared towards what's happening before we actually know who the person is that's going to be hired, and before we know where the person is going to be working, if it's a remote role. The laws in many of these places, starting out with Colorado, California, New York City, are going to require that if you're posting for a remote role and so you don't know where the person's going to end up, in theory, they could be in one of these jurisdictions that requires a salary range to be on the job posting. And so, because of that, employers that have remote populations and they have at least one employee in any of these places now need to include salary ranges for all remote postings. And so
Wow.
it's really expanding, as companies are not necessarily bringing people back to a specific office. They're going to need to think about this more holistically, and it might change the way companies approach doing this for the whole company. We've had some clients who are choosing to only include the salary range where they're required to. So they have an operation in New York, and then they have an operation in New Jersey, and they're including the ranges for New York, but not New Jersey. Other clients are just saying, you know what, we're just going to post it for all positions because it's easier. We're not going to get confused by it. In any discrepancies in how we may pay people differently based on cost of living. If the person ends up working in our New York office instead of our Texas office, can be built into the salary range.
And this gets really complicated. So right now, about half of workers in the US work in a hybrid environment. About a quarter work full-time remote and about a quarter work full-time in the office. But this could all change as well. So even if organizations are not posting these ranges, they could decide to hire more remote workers when the economy gets better and, employees have a little bit more leverage in the equation. And so that can actually make the dynamic even more complicated for them.
Yeah. So it's not an easy subject, but it's something that, people are talking about. They're very aware of the fact that these new laws are coming into effect. There's a lot of campaigns from the local governments where these are being enacted that are letting people know about their rights around this. And so people are very conscious and aware. And if they see a job posting they think should have a range, are calling it out. So it's something people are expecting to see these days.
What do you recommend for companies on how to start navigating pay transparency laws? And should employers who are not in one of these states that have enacted the law prepare as well?
So I think first step is take a look at how you're actually paying people now. That's going to be valuable whether or not you're required to post your job posting, a salary range on job postings or not, because you're going to probably be getting questions from employees, and you want to make sure that you feel comfortable in how you're paying people, and if you're doing so on a fair and business related reasons for any discrepancies. And for employers who are in states that haven't enacted these laws yet, I say yet because we're seeing lots of states and localities, so it's cities and counties that are putting forward these laws, to be prepared because it may be coming your way. And it may actually already be required if you have remote workers, even if a large portion of your workforce is working in person in a state where there isn't something yet. So just start getting prepared for it. You're probably going to start getting questions from employees if you haven't yet, and you'll want to not be caught off guard as you think about these issues.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all this important information about pay transparency laws, Nancy.
Happy to help. Good to speak with you.